Hi, my name is Angie Gordon and I am the former head of care of the new school Butterston. I thought it would be useful to explain to those interested in our story about the involvement of the Witherslack group from the first time that I met them until the school closed on the 23rd of November 2018. So just as a summary, I'll spend a few moments explaining to you their involvement. So on June the 7th, I met one of the directors called Mike Barrow, and that was the first time I had met any members of staff from Witherslack. He was nice, appeared supportive. I told him about the difficult times that we'd experienced in the school and about the animosity from our local council, Perth and Kinross Council, as well as the inexplicable gradings that we had received from the Care Inspectorate in the joint inspection in May 2018. On June the 26th, I then attended a board meeting where Bill told us that Witherslack were interested, and it was the day after that that we had a lovely leaver service at the school, and we didn't return then until after the summer holidays on August the 21st. On August the 22nd, I had found out at that time that the contracts had been signed and that the takeover agreement had been agreed. And it was on the 22nd of August that I met with Jude Jones, another one of the directors. She reassured me that all would be well, and I spent maybe about 20 minutes chatting to her in the head of school's office. And when she started to talk about how Witherslack would support the school and about the safety net that they would provide, I actually got a little bit upset because I was just so relieved that the school was in safe hands and that we were going to be moving forward. We would have the financial backing that we needed. We would also have that external management support, which we really did need at the new school. On September the 3rd, it was positive news from Witherslack. They were saying that they were coming, they were going to be setting up training days, and we started to send all of our policies and procedures to their data room. By the 14th of September, two members of the Witherslack team came up and spoke to me about all aspects of care. So it felt like a bit of a grilling, to be honest, for myself, from Howard Tennant, their director of care, and Marcia McLaughlin, who was the regional manager. We spent a day looking at care plans together, and they focused on one student's care plan in particular. They were looking at the care plans in detail, and they picked up on one risk that they thought should have been included in the risk assessment, and that was to do with the potential for the student becoming obsessed with staff members. Now, although this had been covered in key work, it had not been included in the risk assessment, so that was something that I should have picked up on, and I duly did that and included it at my next opportunity, which was on the Monday. So I felt reassured after meeting with them, although they had highlighted ways in which those care plans would be moved towards their own paperwork. They had only picked up on one thing that they thought should be different about the care plan at that time. On the 17th of November, John Swinney came up to the new school, and I'm sure that in the morning he met with Witherslack members of staff and with the probably members of the board, but I wasn't included in that meeting in the morning. On the 17th of September in the afternoon, on that day, there was an education and care meeting where there were two members of the board, Jude Jones from Witherslack and one of her colleagues, Bill and myself. In that meeting, Jude explained that the care team would be expanded to at least double the amount of care workers. We would have a registered manager in the school, and we would also have registered managers in each of the children's homes, and these would be situated in the two buildings that were on the school site. One is called Kilbray and the other is called the Lodge, and they were also looking at reducing the entry age to the school to 8, and it was 11 years old would have been the youngest at that time. So they also intimated that they were looking at nearby properties, possibly in Dunkeld, for our young adult service. So it was all very positive, and we were moving forward. On the 19th of September, Jude Jones called me to let me know that Howard Tennant, their Director of Care, would be dealing with the appeal from a member of staff who was on a final stage warning. She'd been issued with the warning and she was looking to appeal that, and that would normally be something that would go to the Board of Governors because it was the head of school who had issued the final stage warning. But I was being told at that time that it would not be dealt with by the Board of Governors, it would be dealt with by Witherslack. So that indicated that at that time to me that any further developments with that would be reported to Witherslack rather than to the board. And that was exactly what happened when we received a letter from that member of staff later on in September. So to move forward a little bit, on the 26th of September there was a meeting at the new school with the Care Inspectorate, Education Scotland and Witherslack. Howard Tennant was in attendance. Many of the recommended improvements which had been identified by the Care Inspectorate and Education Scotland in their joint inspection of the May, they were addressed in that meeting, and most of those improvements were about management information systems. So they were looking for an analysis of incidents so that we could look for trends where we could make improvements. They were looking at absence management strategies so that we could have a clearer understanding of how many times a member of staff would be off sick before we would be having to take further action, what situations were acceptable for time off and how many days and so on. They were also looking at progress reports, which would be managed again by the Witherslack Group's management information system, so that when local authorities would be looking for information, it would be available to them. So that was on the morning of the 26th of September. In the afternoon of that day, Howard Tennant held the meeting with the member of staff who had appealed her final stage warning, but that final stage warning was upheld. So that was taking us up to the end of September. So moving on to October. On October the 2nd, I employed another residential care worker, and that post was approved by the board some time before. And although Witherslack had said that they would employ at least twice as many in the care team, they advised just to go ahead with the plans that were already in place for the time being. On October the 3rd, we had a residential student moving into the main building, and she would be requiring one-to-one support, so that was good news. October the 14th, I went down to Cumbria so that I could spend time with Marcia McLaughlin, the regional manager, and other Witherslack staff. I would be visiting their children's homes and a residential school, as well as their head office. So I was picked up at the station by taxi and taken to the hotel. The next morning I was picked up by Marcia, and she took me to a children's home where I met the manager and other staff. I looked at their care plans and gained an understanding of their support structures for the young people, their staffing ratios, as well as their consequence and reward systems. I was impressed by the approach of the manager, as he appeared solution focused and was experienced at looking at innovative ways of helping young people connect with their local communities. This was certainly an aspect of work that I wanted to develop within the new school. I was then taken for a quick tour of one of their residential schools and another children's home before going to their head office with Marcia. There was lots of information to take in, and Marcia was openly critical of some of the policies and practices in Scotland, comparing the Care Inspectorate to Ofsted. She did appear to have a lack of knowledge surrounding some of the Scottish regulations, and she found it hard to believe me when I explained that the standards that I needed to meet as registered manager were all contained within the SSC Codes of Practice and the Health and Social Care Standards. She asked me to contact the Care Inspectorate for clarification on that, which I duly did. I then went to the head office where I met their human resources manager. She explained their absence policy, training policy, pensions, etc. It was all very reassuring. I also met with Mary Orens, who was their lead person with regard to child protection and safeguarding. She explained that she would have weekly calls with me initially to discuss any child protection matters and safeguarding, in addition to any calls that I would make to her with any issues that arose surrounding those areas. I could make those calls at any time. So on the morning of October the 16th, I was picked up at the hotel by Stephen Brown, who was another regional manager. He was pleasant and supportive, and we spent time together at the Holly Greens Children's Home, where he provided an explanation about training regarding the use of their computerised systems. They call it the Witherslack way, and he explained how that worked with regard to all the aspects of a young person's care being kept electronically. And this was to be of particular benefit to the new school, because it would mean that much of the information required by the local authorities would always be available to them without the need to meet the school staff. It would reduce the need for weekly updates, pre-review meetings, absence report documents, etc., because these would be constantly updated in school and accessible to those with clearance for that information. So at the end of that day, he dropped me at the station and I returned home. So the next thing was October the 18th and 19th. Marcia McLaughlin came to visit me at school. We worked through the health and social care standards, and we identified all the areas that we could make improvements, and we made a list that we could work through. She had received a list of requirements from our tenant detailing points that required progress, and she was working to a deadline with regard to implementing the Witherslack way documents and folders, etc. So she was giving me deadlines to work to so that I could manage the work that I needed to make sure that that would go smoothly and that Howard would have the information on time. On October the 23rd, Marcia was again in the new school. I was focusing on child protection paperwork, and she was focusing on folders and organising files for their new administration systems to come. On October the 24th, I began to use the first care plan with all of the Witherslack group documentation, and that was for one young residential pupil. On October the 25th, I worked on the health and social care assessment document as instructed by Marcia, and this was in response to meet the deadlines given by Howard. So I completed that document on October the 26th, and we had gone through every aspect of care within the school. So this was all to do with bedrooms, about treating people with respect, about making sure that the young people knew their rights, making sure that they had all the information available to them. Every part of the health and social care standards was addressed. On October the 30th, I then met Richard Wilkins, their director for safeguarding, along with his associate Katie Huddart. So they came to the new school, they spent time with me, and they were looking through all of the aspects of care and incident reporting, etc. They looked at all the documentation in the care plans and child protection records. They said that it wouldn't take much to transfer the child protection files that myself and Greg, the senior support worker at the time, we had created those and we had kept them up to date, and they said that it would not be a problem to transfer that information onto their own systems. So by November the 7th, I was then informed that Witherslack were pulling out. due to the way that the care inspectorate had reacted to a complaint that had been made by the member of staff that had been on the final stage warning and who had appealed that warning, and the warning had been upheld. So they were now a disgruntled member of staff. So that concern that she raised about the working practices of 2 other members of staff, that resulted in Bill, the head of school, being suspended by the Board of Governors, and the Witherslack group then subsequently pulling out. Now, there weren't many members of the Witherslack group, I don't think, at that point that were aware that Witherslack were actually going to be pulling out, because when Bill was suspended on the 7th of November, the Witherslack group staff who were in school looked shocked by this news. On November the 8th, there was a meeting held at school involving the board and other officials, but I don't know who else was in that meeting. I was told that I wasn't expected to attend. Now, I now know that the care inspectorate are talking about an inspection that took place on November the 8th, and they may well be talking about that meeting. But as far as I was aware, there were no care inspectors in the school that day. I wasn't spoken to at all. Nobody else knew about any of the care inspectors being in to do any kind of school inspection. On November the 9th, I was very concerned at this point that there may well be misinformation given about the school. So I sent out feedback forums to all the members of staff and to the governors. That information can be seen on request, and I was able to gather all of that information before the school closed, so that I had a record of those that were in the school, their opinion about how the school was being managed and how it was making progress. Almost all of the staff gave me feedback, and none of the governors gave me any feedback on those questionnaires. I also gave the feedback forms out to the residential students because I thought it was important to have the young person's point of view on how they felt that they were supported in school. Again, once those feedback forms were returned and put together, it was very positive feedback from the young people where they felt safe in school and very well supported. Again, that information is available on request. On November the 11th, I received an email at 6 o'clock in the evening from Andrew Kuby, where he included the safeguarding report that had been written by Howard Tennant, dated the November the 10th. Now, the board had asked the Witherslack group to do a safeguarding report after the Witherslack group had said that they were pulling out of the takeover. So there was, in my opinion, a clear conflict of interest there. But the board went ahead and did that anyway. So I received this email, and I noticed that Andrew Kuby had also copied in senior officers within Perth and Kinross Council. And I asked him why that had been sent out externally before myself or any other school managers had been given the opportunity to see it and to challenge all of the findings that were in there, because it contained sweeping generalisations that were not based on any evidence whatsoever. It also showed a clear lack of understanding with regard to how controlled drugs are dispensed by pharmacies, and also how to support young people with a diagnosis of pathological demand avoidance, amongst other discrepancies and inaccurate information. Now, during that correspondence via email, there were quite a lot of people copied in. There were the Care Inspectorate, Education Scotland, Witherslack Group, myself, and senior officers in Perth and Kinross Council. But in one of the correspondence that came back from Jude Jones from Witherslack, she was asking Andrew Kuby, she said, it seems like Angie's already aware that Witherslack are pulling out, and I'm just wondering how many other staff in school know that. Now, I didn't know that. That was the first time that I knew that Witherslack wouldn't be continuing, so I was shocked at that. and I was explaining to them that I strongly believed that the school was making good progress, and that even with Witherslack pulling out of the takeover deal, the school would be successful, it could continue, we would have another provider, hopefully, that would want to get involved and to take over the school. So as I was explaining that to the board, Richard Wilkins came into the meeting and said that I needed to leave to speak to another 2 care inspectors who had arrived at the school, and they needed to see me regarding an anonymous complaint that they had received from a member of staff about the quality of the cleanliness in the bedrooms. So I was really surprised at this, but I walked up to the school and I spent time talking to the inspectors. I found out from them that the anonymous member of staff was the same disgruntled member of staff that had made the complaint before, and I also found out that the care inspectorate had received that complaint on the 19th of October about the bedrooms, but they had waited 4 weeks until that day to address the complaint with me. Now, by the time I had finished talking to them and I returned back to the meeting, the board members had all left apart from Sir Andrew Kuby. On November the 19th, we received the devastating news that the school would be closed and that Witherslack were pulling out. Our tenant had said that the school was so unsafe that it should close as quickly as possible. Now, on the Friday the 23rd, in the morning, our tenant had sat in the head of school's office with myself and the other board members, telling us that the school would close, and he said that Witherslack were pulling out because it would be just too expensive, because there were just too many improvements that Witherslack would need to make, because he had deemed that the school was unsafe and it would take too much of an investment from his group to go ahead. So when I asked why just the week before that, Richard Wilkins, the acting head, had said there was nothing in the school that he couldn't turn around within a matter of a couple of weeks. But Howard Tennant didn't answer me when I asked him that question in front of everybody. He just looked at the floor and we carried on. And when it came to the meeting where all of the staff were told that the school would be closing, well, those members of staff that could attend that meeting, Howard Tennant at that point said it just wasn't financially viable, and then he left the meeting and got in his car and drove off. So that was the beginning of the final week at the school, and I will make another clip to talk about the final week of school. Okay, thank you.